Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership Interview Series, sponsored by VGM Advantage. I'm Steve Anderson, your host, and we have a great guest today, Terry Brown. Terry was raised in a farming community in central Nebraska and moved to Kentucky at the age of 19. He was educated for both his undergraduate and physical therapy degree at the University of Kentucky. He has practiced for the past 27 years as an owner in private practice in central Kentucky. He is married to Debbie Brown, a physical therapist, and they have 5 grown children, 2 of which have joined the profession of physical therapy. He has served the profession as president of the Kentucky chapter, chair of the APTA nominating committee, and 5 different APTA advisory committees, and on the PPS board as a director, a vice president, and currently the president. So welcome, Terry. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Steve.
So what introduced you to physical therapy and drove you to become a PT? Let's hear about your journey a little bit.
Wow, that goes back a long way. I was a late college bloomer. I kind of went for a year or so and then dropped out and started a contracting business and did that. So I went back to college at 25, finished at about 27, and then said, now what am I going to do?
Okay.
And so, I took the MCATs, thought I'd go to med school and thought more about that and thought, I don't really have another 9 years in my repertoire. So I was working in a biochemistry lab at the University of Kentucky, and right down the floor from us was the physical therapy department. And I thought, well, that looks kind of interesting. I think I'll go in there. So I did, and I went in. I said, could I volunteer? And in all honesty, there were 6 physical therapists working in that department, all female, all under 30. And I thought, this can't be all bad. And that was my introduction. So it was fun. I worked there with them for probably 6 months volunteering on and off. And I said, this looks great. This is interesting.
Wow. So we heard in Tom's speech last night, as his DICUS acceptance speech, that sometimes when you drop out of school and take that year off, you don't come back, but you did.
I did. That's true.
Yeah. So what was what about that year off working the contracting business said, I don't think I want to do this.
It wasn't a year, it was 5.
Okay. Did I say a year? Yeah, 5.
Yes,
okay.
and my parents weren't too keen on the whole bit because, at that point I had moved to Kentucky and a long way away from home. Yeah. It was time to grow up, and I hadn't done that. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Starting a business and paying for your own livelihood, staying off the street was a great motivator. I grew up working on farms, so I knew how to work, it was a great time. We did a lot of deck additions and screened-in porches and painted a whole lot of houses. Yeah. And I'll be honest with you, I remember it like it was yesterday. I was on a 40-foot extension ladder scraping paint off the side of a house on a July afternoon in Kentucky. And I just said, there's got to be a better way to make a living. And that's when I went over to the University of Kentucky and signed up for the fall program.
That's interesting. And Debbie got a handyman at home. That's what every wife wants.
Yeah, well,
right?
Used to be.
Okay, that's great. So here's a question I've always had. Now, Kentucky is a pretty small, mostly rural state.
Yes.
Agreed? So how come it has so many high-powered PTs in leadership positions nationally?
It's an interesting question, and I've asked it myself. I don't know if I have the answer to that. I think in some respects, because of the ruralness and because of the geographic separateness, private practice thrived in Kentucky because it was the hospitals weren't out there. Physical therapy wasn't a big thing.
Couldn't cover it, yeah.
Yeah, so I think practices started up from people from their areas and things, and they were kind of innovators. And the earliest private practice was in Kentucky was in Lexington with some guys that really grew it, and it was big. So I think the innovation of those people is probably what drove it, and made some great mentors for a guy like me. Coming out and watching what they were doing and going, wow, I'd like to do something like this.
So was the environment then and now collaborative in your opinion, or was it, because a lot of times we talk about how PTs can kind of be territorial, pretty competitive, You guys seem to get along well, at least what I see in the national meetings, but maybe at home, not so much?
In that day, it's collaborative because nobody was in anybody else's territory.
Yeah.
It was, if there was any animosity, it was probably between the hospitals not liking those upstart private practice people.
Yeah.
But I think now there's obviously more encroachment than there used to be. But those of us that have been there a while and have done our thing, we're okay with that. We've established it, and we are all willing to help young people starting out on their own. That's just a kind of a profile that we utilize in Kentucky. Let's get our young guys started. Let's get them in private practice. So I do think it's more collaborative.
Yeah. So you got out of PT school. Did you go right into private practice, or did you work somewhere else first for a while? Tell us what happened there.
My first job out of PT school was in a pain management center.
Okay.
Which was a fairly new concept in the mid '80s.
Yeah.
And it was just interesting. I needed a job. I had loans come due, and I was getting married a month after I graduated. So, I took this job. It was a great first job. Nobody knew anything. And so it wasn't even open yet, so they just sent me to continuing ed for 6 months. So I just continued my education.
Wow.
And got all kinds of things, lots of TMJ work, lots of, exercise and pain management work. Mm-hmm. Pretty innovative stuff for that age.
Yeah.
I lasted a year before I said, I'm going to get out of here.
Yeah.
And then I went to work in a private practice.
Okay. And then what made you want to go on your own then?
When I went to work for a guy in a private practice in Danville, Kentucky, I thought that's where I'd be. I thought I would be a part of that practice and buy into that practice and be there. It didn't work out that way. Sometimes those things don't, know. But once I was there, I knew that's what I wanted to do. There was no doubt in my mind that's where I was going to be, in something that I'm running, that I've got control, and that I'm seeing patients in a daily basis in that type of atmosphere. So when that didn't work out, I started looking for other opportunities. Mm-hmm. Went to actually the group I spoke of, who was the first private practitioners in Kentucky, because I needed a job, and they hired me to run a contract at a hospital.
Oh, okay.
So I became director of rehab at a small rural hospital, under contract to these guys.
Right.
Great advantage. I learned all about how contracts work, about how hospitals manage and get paid, and et cetera.
Probably met a bunch of physicians.
Made a lot of connections.
Yeah.
And after about 2.5 years, they lost the contract. All right. And they said, well, we'll move you to another one. I said, no, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think I'll open a practice.
Oh, that worked out.
So it did.
Yeah.
And I moved down the street and opened up a little practice.
And that was 1980?
Would have been about 1987, no, probably 88.
Okay.
Yeah.
And to this day, you're still treating patients?
I am.
Yeah.
I am. I still see patients.
Yeah.
I was 3 days a week, now I'm up to 4.
What's happening there?
Yeah, we lost a therapist. You know how it is. You got to go to work.
Got to pick up the slack. What's been the most challenging part of being in private practice physical therapy? I mean, we can kind of assume what the great parts are. What's been the most challenging?
For me, because I do think it's different things are more challenging for different people.
Yeah.
Our skill sets are different, right? We're all therapists. We have that skill set, but we don't all have business skill sets. And I think the most difficult part for me is managing people. Yeah. I wasn't really good at that, and I didn't get it. I just assumed everybody was like me and would work like me.
Yeah.
And when that didn't happen, I would get really frustrated, and I didn't do a good job of managing that. So baptism by fire, I'm much better at it than I used to be, but only out of survival.
Okay, so did you learn anything in your 5 years of contracting business that you could transfer over to the PT world, or maybe that was the problem?
Well, yeah, that may have been. Contracting's a whole different story. I learned that, they're always looking for a better contract. You know, from the day you walk in, no matter how good a job, they're looking for somebody that can do it cheaper or better.
Yeah.
And you know, from that point. But I think from managing people, the biggest thing that I learned that was the biggest help to me in managing people was you cannot put a person in a position that they have no skill for and expect them to get good at. Okay, you've got to put somebody that has that aptitude in there and then help them to get better. And I just expected people, you can learn this and do this, you know, and I failed a bunch.
So building on that a little bit, so what would you say your leadership style was when you first started, and what's your leadership style now?
Wow, polar opposites.
Yeah.
And managed by a lot of people. I was a bull in a china shop. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I'm like, you know, I got this figured out. This is the way we're all going to do it. You all do it my way. If you don't do it my way, you need to get out of the way.
Yeah.
And honestly, for many years was like that. Luckily, I had a partner that, as we grew, that whose leadership style was to get out of my way and let me do it.
Yeah.
So it worked. Other than the poor employees that had to put up with me. So, you know, what that had to change, obviously. You know, you can only go through so many employees before you have to figure out something's not right.
So you learn from your mistakes.
Yeah.
So what's your leadership style now?
I think it's evolved a lot over the last 10 years. I like to set a direction, okay? And then I like people to work with me to figure out how to get where we're going. And if I can set the direction of where we want to be, then what I enjoy is sitting back and helping those people figure out how we're going to get there and not trying to drive that.
Well, a lot of people will argue the number one skill of a good leader is to have the right vision. So that's basically what you're saying. You come up with a vision, and then you got to let people do it. Now, you must have learned a lot along the way, because you had a very successful term as a PPS president, and that's managing, or I probably shouldn't say manage, facilitating a board of very successful people that, in their own right, kind of probably have ideas on how things should be done, and you have to facilitate that. So.
Well, yes, I mean, you can appreciate it.
Yeah.
You've been there.
Yeah.
And I'll be awfully flat honest. I learn by watching more than, I mean, I read and et cetera, but I learn by watching. That's my mode that I learn. You know, I watched you very carefully. I watched Tom DeAngelis very carefully, and I learned a lot from those things. You and Tom have different leadership styles, but you know, I just borrowed the best and utilized them. So yes, it was a learning piece. And managing a board of directors who have all different types of personalities and leadership styles themselves is a challenge. But you know, I really have enjoyed it. I don't know that there's anything I enjoyed more than the last 3 years of watching that board evolve and the things that happened.
Yeah. Well, good for you. That's awesome. I mean, and people think you did a great job. You had a great. We're here at the PPS annual conference to tape this interview, and it's your last official duty.
It is.
But you got a great standing ovation from the members who thought you did a great job. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
So what do you think, you know, being the private practice section president and seeing a lot of, you know, you're in a small private practice, and a lot of members are in small private practices. So what do you think private practice PT should do more of to be more successful?
I think, you know, private practice PT has always been a well-kept secret. And so we've got to get out in front more. And you know, we've been saying that for years, and how do you do it? And it's a difficult piece, you know. But I do think that where the younger generation has done a much better job of than we have is getting out in front of the public. And I think that's where a lot of private practices tend to rest on their laurels or their referrals or their whatever, and don't get out in front of the public. And to me, that's where you're going to be seeing the public creates the demand for anything. And then who pays for that will react to what the public wants.
So have you seen a shift in that in your career? In other words, you know, we're probably the same vintage as far as doing that. So it used to be all about building a relationship with physicians. Now is it different? Is it, you know, so now you're much more with patients and the public, or do you still have those relationships with those physicians?
Yes and no. I mean, I'll look at that from two different ways. You're absolutely correct. It used to be all about relationships with physicians. It's all about your referral basis, and the patient did whatever the doctor told them to do. If it was go to therapy, then you wanted to make sure that you were the place they went to, that he told them to go to. It's way different than that now. I don't see, not that doesn't exist. I'm sure that it does, but you have a much more informed consumer who has looked at every option on the internet, silly and good, and comes in with all of that in their mind. So I do think we are getting out in front of the public. We still have a big job to do to educate the public about who we are and what we do, but we're doing better at that. But you, again, have to have relationships with physicians. What's changed for me is the nature of that relationship. When I started, probably when you started, it was a very, somewhat subservient relationship. If I bring you your breakfast in the morning and, I give you enough gifts and tickets here or whatever, you're going to give me your patients and I'm going to be eternally grateful. Right. It was today it's much more of a partnership. Yeah. And I think developing those partnerships with physician groups is enormously important, but that's what it is. They understand now that you have the ability to refer as many patients to them as they do to you. Yeah. And that's a great relationship to be in. Yeah,
yeah. So what do you think, what are you most proud of as your tenure as PPS president?
There's a couple of things that stand out. Probably, I'll give you two things that are considerably different. One's more of an internal and one's more of an external. The internal one is we were able to negotiate a completely new contract with APTA for management services of PPS. It was something that I just absolutely had a passion to do before I left. And I'm glad to say on Wednesday morning we signed that contract.
Just this last Wednesday?
Yes.
Oh, good. Right. Okay.
So we now are no longer a managed section. We are a partner with APTA. We have a relationship, if people would know it, more like the Foundation for Physical Therapy. Okay. We control all of our own employees, all of our own salaries, all of our own benefit packages, and it's a growth process that now allows PPS to move to more staff-driven activities. We've become too big and too many projects to be a completely volunteer organization. Things falter and don't get done. The Titanic turns too slow on a volunteer organization. You have to have qualified staff to be able to drive that. And we were hamstrung under the old contract.
Yeah. You can only go so far with volunteers.
Right.
I mean, and especially when it's, they do it when they have time, which is totally normal, So yeah, well, that's great. I mean, that's definitely a change, and I can see why you're proud of that. Yeah. So you had two things.
The second is a little bit more of something that I fell into and didn't know I was any good at, but evidently I must have had some talent for it. But I think that PPS under my tenure, we have been the balancing effort in bringing together different areas of private practice, and also bringing that in with APTA. And many there was a lot of animosity over CPT coding changes into things, and schisms and and lots of talk. And PPS was able to be the balancing force there. And I think we've done a really good job of bringing everybody to the table and letting everyone get heard and everybody's feelings being better, and a collaborative nature now being attempted to be undertaken, agree what we can agree on, work together on what we can work together on. And that makes me feel good because, we love to be our own worst enemy. We got enough people that want to, don't want us around. We don't need to fight each other. Yeah, exactly. And I think, this whole business of being together is a great advantage to us. So being able to broker some of that has been a real pleasure for me.
And then on the flip side, what's been your biggest challenge?
I think moving the Titanic.
Yeah.
It's been a real challenge to try to. There's great ideas out there. There's great efforts being out there. There's great starts out there, but gosh, they move slow. We need them now. We don't need them, as Jerry said this morning, 20 years down the road.
Right.
We've got to have things moving now. So it is a challenge to make that happen, and it's moving faster. We may be up to a battleship instead of the Titanic as far as moving, but it's a challenge.
Yeah. So you've been in it for a long time. You've been a PT. You've been treating patients many years. Yeah. What gets you up in the morning and gets you excited? I mean, what about that patient experience? You just you still enjoy it every day?
Yeah. I don't think I'll ever get tired of seeing patients. I just love the challenge. I love the puzzle.
Yeah.
I like evaluating new patients better than I like treating patients now, because I like that challenge. I love that patient that comes in and says, I've been to 4 doctors, 2 surgeons, and had all these tests, and nobody knows what's wrong with me. But I hurt. That's my patient. And
it's so interesting you say that, because I've talked with many in many PT schools and then new professionals, and I was always perplexed when a new professional would say, "Oh no, another new patient." It's kind of like, to me, that's the fun part of the profession, right? New patients, because that's what you're doing. You're trying to figure out the puzzle. So, in a perfect world, you'd have nothing but new patients.
Absolutely.
Right?
So, let somebody else treat them.
Yeah. But anyway, that's an interesting you say that, because I think a lot of people look at new patients, and I mean, everyone likes a new patient, but they look at it as being harder or more work intensive or more documentation intensive or whatever. So, Lord knows I can only see 2 or 3 a day. Well, that doesn't always fly. So,
True.
Yeah. So what are you looking forward to? So you're stepping down as president just as your terms have run out. So you kind of have to do something new. You still working in the private practice. What's the future look like for Terry Brown?
That's an interesting question, because I would say that to ask that today is completely different than 6 months ago.
Yeah.
I don't know is a real answer. And I know it's something in the physical therapy world. I'm about finished with running a practice day to day. I've done that. I've got young partners. It's time for them to run it. It's time for me to step back. But I've got a lot of juice left to do something. So I'm going to take some time. I'm going to sit back and I'm going to figure out what that is I want to do. I'm not sure I've seen it yet. But I'm sure it's out there.
Okay.
So
yeah, you don't always have the answer. So, and now I heard today, I guess I knew this, but it was reinforced today, that so you have 2 adult children now that have gone into the PT world.
I do. I have my oldest son, who's 30, who is a physical therapist in Nashville, a bit of an entrepreneur. I'm calling him that because, this week he has a job and next week he may not. And that's entrepreneurship. But he's trying to figure out where he wants to be. He's worked in private practice. He's done hospital work. He's done contract work. He's worked for a traveler. And he's just kind of exploring it all and trying to pay off those student loans. And doing that. And then my youngest son, I have 5 children, so my youngest son is in his first year at Bellarmine University PT program. So he's just getting embarked on his PT career. So we'll see. Maybe we can have the Brown Brothers private practice at some point.
There you go. It's interesting you say that, because I do think it's different now with the new professionals coming out as I guess we just went into things we did and maybe we just kept our nose down and did what we thought we should do or whatever, but it's not unusual to hear that story with new professionals of coming out and can't exactly find the right fit yet, and there's some bouncing around until you find that, and it's hard to know. It's hard to know what to do, so that's not an unusual story. So usually when we wind these things down, we ask for a pearl of wisdom from you in relation to leadership. So if you were going to give us a pearl of wisdom in leadership, what would you say?
When you're in a leadership position, spend some time every day quietly reflecting and be quiet and listen to what the universe, whatever your discussion is saying. Yeah. And when you hear that, act on it, okay? I think we all are busy and we get caught up into day-to-day activities and the pressures, and we don't take time to sit and listen and reflect. And that's when we don't make good decisions. So I think that's the best thing I can offer, is taking that time each day to listen and reflect. And it could be on many things, and that's, leadership at home and in the office and everything.
That's great. So you still getting on that bike?
I'm getting on that bike a lot. I've got about an 80-mile-a-week average this year.
That's awesome.
That's not bad.
Good. So as you step back a little bit, there'll be more time on that bike, right?
Yeah, I got a new bike, so I'm really pretty hyped about that.
Yeah, That's great. That's great. Well, thanks for being here, Terry. This is another episode of Profiles in Leadership interview series. I want to thank our guest today, Terry Brown, and thanks VGM Advantage for sponsoring this. Be sure to go to VGM Advantage website and also Orange.coaching website and look at all our whole library of podcasts and video interviews. And you can see a lot of these, and this will be posted as well. So thank you, Terry. I really enjoyed being with you. So good luck with your
Thank you for
your new
everything.
venture. Okay, thank you.